Okay, so normally I would start a video like this by talking about, oh, I'm sorry about the noise, I'm sorry, the background, whatever else. But at this point, it's pretty much all I can work with, so not going to apologize because at least I'm making videos. Obviously, the circumstances are not ideal, but I would like to keep creating, so here we are. So what is this video? This is a different video than what I normally do, and it's because for like the entirety of the moving process, I got really obsessed with watching, I think her name's Noelle Gallagher. She's like a booktuber on YouTube, and she does like 30-minute reading vlogs, and then at the end of every month, she'll do like what I read that month, and I was like, that looks really cool, but I don't read. I used to read all the time, but it's been a very long time since I've sat down and just like been dedicated to books, and I was like, well, I want to change that because I spend way too much time on my phone, no time reading, brain is melting, all that stuff. So for March, even though we were moving, even though it was very chaotic, I had my midterms for my classes, there was a lot going on, but I decided I was going to get through as many books as possible. Despite all of the chaos, I managed to read 9 books this month, which is, I think, more than I read all of last year, so I think that's pretty good. I will say the reason I'm so low energy right now is because it is 8 in the morning, so let's just have a cozy morning and talk about some books. I don't think I'm gonna have any rating system though. I'm not gonna like have 1 to 10 or 1 to 5, whatever it is, because I'm a bad judge. I don't know. There's no spoilers in this also. I'm just gonna be talking about my thoughts on the book, on like the vague idea of the plot. So first up, the first book that I read this month was All the Right Places, which if you know me, that book is very special. This was actually my 7th time reading it. There was one time in high school where I finished reading it, and I was sitting at lunch with like one of my friends at the time, and I didn't really like them, and I was like, well, I have this book that I enjoy with characters that I enjoy, and I'm next to this person that I do not. So I finished the book and I immediately flipped to the front page and just started reading it again because I'd rather do that than deal with the person. But yeah, I think it's safe to say that that is my favorite book. That is the book that kind of defined my high school years because I read it so many times during high school. And it's weird because it's been with me through so many phases of my life because obviously it was there for that lunch, and then it was there like now where I'm out of high school. It's a completely different reading experience because when you're in high school and you're reading about high school characters, you feel that connection, but now I'm looking back at it as somebody who is, you know, a couple years older than the characters, and I'm seeing that it is a little bit childish, and it is just kind of like, you know, like the book is written for high schoolers, it's meant for younger people, so it's weird to come at it with a more adult perspective, although I will say I'm not much of an adult. Hopefully you know what I mean. It's just weird to see it in different phases of your life and see the different parts that you connect to and the parts that maybe don't fit your life as much anymore. And I really didn't expect to cry because I've been through this story so many times. Of course, I know what happens, but you know, at the end, it still somehow ended up catching me off guard. I still ended up crying for it. I'm reading off like my notes here because I'm going off of a month of memories of these books, so I wanted to just get my actual opinions and not like my month later thoughts. I cried from pages 300 to 320, and I will say that is a lot of pages to be consistently crying for, but I'm pretty sure I did. And one other thing is I used this book to press flowers because it's so worn down from how many times I've read it and like how I carry it everywhere with me. I just figured no harm in messing it up some more, so anytime I get little flowers or anything, I'll put them in the book and then close it, and then the next time I read it, I'm just going through it and I'll just find flowers, and it's a little treat to myself. Immediately after finishing All the Bright Places, like I set it down, there was maybe an hour in between where I recorded an intro to another video because I did a reading vlog of A Little Life. If you know anything about that book, it is meant to be very sad. It's meant to just absolutely destroy you, and it didn't. I did, like I said, do a whole vlog about that if you'd like to see my actual thoughts on the book and like my in-depth sort of thought process while reading it. Honestly, didn't really think about this book past that video, past that week. It didn't have any lasting impact on me. I do say don't read it if you're sensitive to more serious topics because it definitely could affect you. Personally, I've never really been like deeply upset by darker topics or anything of that nature, so it didn't really bother me too much. And I'm not saying that as a challenge, so you go read it and then be like, oh, it didn't bother me either. I'm just saying genuinely, like, I read it, it was a little sad, but it was nothing that, like, broke me. I wrote that I teared up a couple times, but there was no point where I actually properly cried, and that the traumas in the book are fairly predictable, which I know is kind of, it's a questionable thing to say. I kind of expected it to be more graphic, so I was kind of almost let down, but obviously you don't want people writing in depth about trauma like how I was expecting, so I mean, it's for the best, really. And I did read that book within 48 hours because as much as I say it was predictable and all this other stuff, I could not put it down. I felt so attached to the characters. I got through it 2 days. Most of the books in this month I did read before, and I am rereading because I want to say freshman year, I had a giant bookshelf, full top to bottom books, and I got rid of, I think, over 100. And recently I went through those stacks and I decided, is there stuff that I do actually still want to keep? And these are some of the books that I decided are worth a reread to decide if I still like them or if they were actually worth getting rid of. So a lot of these, all but one of what I'm about to tell you, I've read before. Like, out of these 9, there's only 2 that I didn't read, and it's A Little Life and then the 4th book. So next we have The Haunted by Danielle Vega. If you know the Merciless series, I think that series is great. I think it's so cool. It's the first, like, spooky books that I've ever read, but I thought they were good. The Haunted follows just, like, there's a cursed house, and then they're trying to not die because the house that they live in is cursed. That's pretty much, you know, it's another haunted house story. And the only reason that I reread this one is because I wanted to read the second book, The Unleashed, and I saw it in stores, and I was like, well, I can't find The Haunted, which is the first one, and then I realized that I already own it, and I've already read it. So I read it just so I could see what the second one is, but I said basically it's just a cursed house. It's not as spooky as the Merciless series, but still pretty good at making you uncomfortable, specifically when it goes into details about, like, what is haunting the house, because the one thing that this author is very good at is the gory details. She's good at, like, describing the things that you don't really want to think about. For example, stapling somebody's mouth shut. You don't really want to think about that, but she is not afraid to go there. I think the series is a lot less spooky and a lot more just, like, uncomfortable to read about. And the same goes for The Unleashed, which the main focus for some reason is wasps and just, like, bugs being under your skin, and just bugs in general I do not vibe with. So I was very uncomfortable reading this book because I do not like bug themes. Yeah, I thought the actual storyline wasn't that great. I thought it was just kind of dumb horror characters being dumb horror characters. The thing that makes horror exciting is if the characters are actually smart and they still can't win, and I felt like this one was just kind of the characters doing dumb things and then they died because of it, and it's like, yeah, well, you kind of deserve that. Although I don't actually know if anybody dies or not, but all the misfortune that they receive, I do think it was somewhat deserved because they kind of were asking for it. So this one fell a little flat for me. The one thing is, it was cool to see, like, the backstory of where they live, and specifically, like, the house that she lives in, like, how the curse has gone on beyond what they thought it did in the first book. But again, if you don't like descriptions of bugs under your skin, maybe this isn't the book for you. And next, we have the entirety of the Red Queen series. For those of you who don't know, the Red Queen was one of those series that was popular probably around the same time as, like, Maze Runner, Percy Jackson, all that stuff. I feel like it kind of, it can get grouped into that. I feel like it might have been a little bit after that time, but I still associate them. Basically, it's the same plot as Hunger Games, but a little different. It's the same thing of, like, there's these higher up people and there's the lower people, and the lower people get treated terribly. There are all these cities and they're just, you know, they're treated like garbage, and then the higher up people get to do stuff for sport and they just, like, treat them terribly because it's fun and because they have the advantage, whatever else. Then there's one person who stands up and gets in the way. That is my very, very detailed, very in-depth description. But yeah, that's kind of the basic plot of it. And then from there it goes into, like, a rebellion against the government because the lower people, the reds, they're red blood because the higher people have silver blood. So the red people are trying to overthrow the silver government. They're trying to be equals because there's a war going on and they feel like the reds are just being thrown into it and they're just gonna die for this war that doesn't mean anything. It's just a lot of, like, rebellion against the kingdom because the reds want equality, but do they actually want power and not equality? They want, like, whatever. There's lots of betrayals throughout the whole thing. You never really know who you can trust because the main character, you know, she's a red, but she's thrown into all of these situations with so many different people. So there's a lot of times where you don't really know which characters are gonna end up being okay, and sometimes that can make you very sad. Over Red Queen, I wrote, I don't remember much from the first time that I read it, but I had a feeling for what the twist at the end would be. And it did still hurt my heart to read it just because I did forget some of the bigger events, but one of the big twists that comes at the end of Red Queen, I did remember, or it was predictable. I'm not sure if I necessarily remember. I'm sure in some part of my brain I did, but yeah, I saw one of the twists coming, but I forgot about another thing that happens, and it's sad. I think the ending of that book is great, you know? I think the last little bit of it really builds up to something that's really cool and has a lot of potential. And I wrote that it's exciting to get to revisit these characters. There's a lot of instability, so to be able to revisit characters I think was very comforting for me, and that's why I reread so many books this month, is because I was just finding something that is familiar and I was sticking with it. The 6th book that we have is called Cruel Crown, and it's actually it's a short story that is talking about the backstory of 2 characters that you're introduced to in the Red Queen book. The first story talks about Cal. Cal is one of the princes. He's supposed to become king in the book. It talks about Cal's mother. That's the first little short story that Woodpecker is going to come back here. And that's going to be unfortunate. Okay. I'm going to try my best to continue. He's coming to hear the stories. The first story talks about Cal's mother, who is like the previous queen, and it's just talking about her life and like the part of the story that you didn't get to hear because she's just kind of not in the story anymore. So you get to kind of hear how that happened and why she's not there anymore. And then the second short story talks about Farley, who is the leader of the Scarlet Guard, which is the rebellion that's happening. And you get to hear about kind of like this other side to the rebellion. You get to actually see it from the rebellious perspective. I wrote that I was interested in the Queen's story because I had genuine emotion for her. She seemed very kind. It was very upsetting to see the other people in the kingdom be treating her so poorly just because of her abilities, because I forgot to mention, the Silvers are special because they have abilities. They can manipulate fire, metal, they can, you know, different stuff like that. On the other hand, Farley's story was a little bit hard to read, and I do remember that it was hard to read the first time as well. I just really, you know, because it has like letters between the different members of the guard, and I found myself both times skipping through those. I did not care enough to read them. Personally, there was never a time where I felt attached to Farley enough to really care about her backstory. The 7th book that I read this month was Glass Sword, which is the second proper book in the Red Queen series. I wrote that it's hard to read about rebellion, unnecessary war, and untrustworthy governments right now because look at where we live. So while it started off being comforting, I will say that it became a little bit too close to home. I wrote, the instability of life right now does not pair well with the instability the characters have. People have mixed feelings about this series, but by the end of it, I was once again invested and had to set the book down at some parts because of how dramatic it is. Some people say that it's too slow, and just like the whole series in general is too slow or too boring or whatever else, but I like that this whole second book takes place over the span of like a couple days. Like a majority of the book happens over like not much time at all, and I really like that because it feels like you're going through each of these dragging days with these characters and they're watching their world fall apart and you're seeing it kind of in real time. Do you see him right there? That's very funny, his little reflection. There's some people that like, you know, they write about their characters and they'll go through like months of stuff, especially for like romance books. I feel like there's a lot of skipping around and you're just like jumping through the months because you want the characters to connect, and they can't do that within the span of a couple days. This book does a really good job of holding on to every moment because that's all the characters have, really. Also, it just reminds you how much you can actually do in a day because it's emphasized a lot at the start of the book of like, oh, that was only yesterday, that was only 2 days ago that this thing happened, and so much can change in your life. And while obviously that is quite a drastic example, it can be obviously applied to daily life. Like, so much can happen over the course of a couple days, a couple weeks, whatever it is. It felt very personal, and I appreciated how slow it was. I wrote that it feels similar to how long my actual days are with everything that we're doing, and it gives time to connect to each character at every interaction, and also that I can relate to the sibling dynamic of one trying to be in control in order to show that they're not the forgotten one. It's a lot of brotherly competition, and I feel like, you know, obviously that's an extreme. Fighting over countries is a big thing, but we can all relate to, you know, having somebody who is seen as better than you and you just want to be seen as equals, or you want to maybe be seen as better. I then took a break from the Red Queen series because the whole overthrowing the government, it just kind of, it was a lot to take in at once. So I started reading the Fantastic Beasts screenplay, and I knew I'd get through it in a couple hours because last time I think I read through it in like 3 hours. It's just like dialogue, it's very short, but it's very interesting to read screenplays and to see like what the plan is for where the characters are going to be and all this stuff. I'm not good at picturing characters at all, but once I've seen the movie and then I can come back to it and it's a direct screenplay of like what was happening in the movie, it's very easy to imagine the characters exactly how they're presented, and it was very fun. I wrote that it was just a good break from how stressful Red Queen is. It was just very nice to read about a little guy and his little animals for a little bit, and it made me very happy. And then we're on to the last book, number 9, which is King's Cage. And that book is the last one of the Red Queen series, and if I'm being honest, it's currently April 3rd, and I'm only halfway through it. So I guess technically it shouldn't go on this list, but, you know, it's been a very stressful month, and I got over halfway through it, and I figured I'll just throw it on here. If I do end up finishing reading it before I edit and post this, I'll put my final thoughts. Okay, I just finished this book. What an ending. What an unsatisfying and completely realistic ending. But so far, I like the story, but sometimes long stories can get intimidating because it feels like you've been with the characters for so long. It's just like a certain commitment when you're reading a series because you have to go through the whole thing and you don't want to read like just the first 2 books and then stop and not get to the last one. So I did end up searching for an audiobook, and I've kind of been playing that in the background while I read because otherwise I find that I'm just getting distracted, I'm getting bored, whatever else. It's been a good way of refocusing my brain. It's been a good little guided reading session. I've never really listened to audiobooks before because I've kind of thought that they're cheating, they're not actual reading, whatever else, but they can be beneficial. But yeah, those are my books read in March of 2022. And this is probably not a series that I'm going to continue just because I really just wanted to read as many books as I could in March to be able to say that I had all this stuff going on and I was still finding time to read. But I have been enjoying watching book vloggers recently, so I would like to maybe do some other book related videos. I'm not really gonna have an outro for this video because this bird is really frustrating. If you have any books that you'd want me to read or that, like, you know, you'd recommend because I'm trying to get back into reading, then please tell me in the comments because I would love to check out some more books. Alright, cool. See you in the next video. Bye bye.